There are moments in life when it feels like God has walked away, when prayers return in silence, when peace doesn't come no matter how long you wait, when you look around for signs, for comfort, for presence, and find only stillness. It's in those moments your heart quietly wonders, has He left me? You wouldn't say it out loud, but the thought lingers. Maybe He's disappointed. Maybe you've done something wrong. Maybe this silence means you're on your own now. And though you keep showing up, praying, reading, waiting, your soul starts to ache from the emptiness. You think back to the days when your faith felt alive, when worship stirred your spirit, and you didn't have to question whether God was near. Now, everything feels muted, distant, dry. But what if this silence doesn't mean absence? What if it means God is closer than ever, just working in a way your senses can't register yet? What if the very moment you think He's gone is actually the moment He's digging the deepest into your soul? We often think God's shaping work will feel sacred, soft, affirming. But much of His refining happens in the quiet, in the dark, in the places where we feel abandoned, but are actually being held tighter than ever. Not because God steps back, but because He steps in so close that we can't separate His presence from our own ache. Just like a gardener covers seeds in silence, unseen beneath the soil, God sometimes buries us in seasons of waiting. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Not to push us away, but to grow something deeper inside of us. Roots that can hold when storms come. Faith that doesn't depend on feeling. Think of the disciples during the storm. Jesus was in the boat, but asleep, silent. Not because He didn't care, but because He wanted them to learn that His presence didn't depend on their panic, that He hadn't left. He was simply teaching them to believe beyond what they could see or hear. The same is true for you. The ache you feel, the questions, the quiet, the long days without clarity, aren't signs of God's absence. They're evidence that something deeper is happening, something invisible, sacred, eternal. In fact, some of the most profound shaping God does happens when we feel the most unsure. So if today your prayers feel unanswered, if your heart feels cold, if you're wondering whether God even sees you anymore, this may be the very season He's preparing you for what's next. Not through noise, but through stillness. Not through constant reassurance, but through trust. And that trust, though small and trembling, is the soil of transformation. Let it grow. We often imagine growth will feel like progress, like motion, clarity, momentum. But God's way is often slower, gentler, hidden. He shapes not in the spotlight, but in the secret, not in constant revelation, but in the rhythm of silence and surrender. This is how faith deepens, not by having all the answers, but by learning to stand when answers don't come. Maybe you feel like you're stuck, like your prayers are going nowhere, like the same fears visit you every night. But there's something deeper God may be doing, forming patience, humility, endurance. These are not glamorous, but they're essential. They're what hold up the life that everyone else sees on the surface. God isn't looking to build a faith that shines on the outside, but collapses when pressure comes. He's building something anchored, rooted, quietly resilient. And to do that, He often leads us through times that look like nothing is happening, but something is happening. Every time you return to Him, even in frustration, even in weariness, something is happening. Every time you open your Bible and read, even when it feels hollow, something is happening. Every time you whisper a prayer and hear no reply but still choose to speak, something is happening. You are being shaped, not for a moment, but for a lifetime. Not for applause, but for endurance. Not for comfort, but for purpose. Think of Moses. After the miracle of the Red Sea, there was a wilderness, years of silence, of wondering, of leading people who didn't always believe. But all of that, every step, every dry day, every moment of silence was part of the shaping. Not because God forgot Moses, but because God was forming him. The same is true for you. You might not see the fruit yet. You might not feel the strength yet. But underneath your questions, a stronger faith is forming. A quieter trust is taking root. You're learning to follow God, not just when you feel Him, but when you can't. And that's where real faith begins. When worship is not based on emotion, but on choice. When surrender isn't driven by answers, but by trust. When peace doesn't come from circumstances, but from the unshakable truth that God is still here, right here, in this silence, in this waiting, in this moment where nothing seems to move. He is shaping you. Let this silence do its work, not to punish, but to prepare, not to confuse, but to call you deeper. This isn't the end of the story. It's the middle. The sacred in-between, where you're learning what it means to be held, even when you can't feel it. And the shaping isn't over yet. Sometimes we mistake God's silence for absence. We assume that if we can't feel Him, He must have turned away. But what if He's closer than ever, not speaking loudly because He's doing something deeper, something that doesn't require words, only presence? Think of a sculptor at work. The shaping isn't loud. It's careful, intentional. Every cut, every smooth stroke, every small movement is shaping the form into something beautiful. The clay may not understand what's happening, but the artist sees the vision from the start. He knows what he's creating. God sees what He's forming in you. He knows the doubts you don't say out loud. He knows the tired prayers and the moments when you wanted to give up. He knows how hard it is to keep believing when nothing feels alive in your spirit. And still, He stays, not pacing in heaven, waiting for you to be stronger, but right beside you, shaping you in the silence. You see, the loudest transformations don't always come with noise. They come in the moments no one sees, in the stillness of a quiet room, in the seconds when you choose to keep going, in the decision to trust without explanation. That's where real change happens. And you don't have to fake it. You don't have to pretend to be okay. God never asked you to wear a mask of faith. He just asks you to come, to sit with Him even when you feel nothing, to be honest about your questions, to bring your weariness and say, God, I'm still here. That is enough, because faith isn't about a perfect posture. It's about presence, staying, even when you're broken, especially when you're broken. And what you'll find over time is that the silence won't last forever. The numbness won't define you. The feeling of being spiritually distant isn't the truth of your identity. It's a season, a chapter, not the end. You are still loved, still seen, still chosen. God hasn't walked away. He hasn't changed His mind about you. In fact, He's using this very season to write something deeper into your soul, a faith that doesn't depend on feelings, a trust that stands when the winds blow, a heart that knows how to find Him in the quiet. You are being shaped for something you cannot yet see. And one day, you'll look back and realize the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. It was holy ground. It was God doing what only He can, transforming you from the inside out. So for now, stay in the tension, stay in the unknowing, stay in the surrender, because this moment, this quiet, confusing, stretching moment, may just be the place where your real faith begins to grow. There's something sacred about choosing to stay when everything inside you wants to leave. When prayers feel pointless, when the word seems silent, when your worship is only a whisper, but still you show up. This is where faith becomes more than a feeling. This is where it learns to breathe without applause, where it walks without answers, where it stands not because it's easy, but because it's real. Real faith isn't loud, it's not flashy, it's not always inspiring. Sometimes it looks like a tired person sitting alone, whispering the same prayer again. Not because it worked yesterday, but because it's all they know to do. And that is enough. God never said we'd always feel Him. He never promised the road would always make sense. But He did promise this: I will never leave you. That promise wasn't based on our performance. It wasn't rooted in our strength. It was grounded in His character. So when you wonder where He went, remember, He's never been the one to walk away. Our emotions shift, our circumstances change, our perspective gets clouded, but God remains steady. Even when you don't sense Him, He is surrounding you. Even when your thoughts spiral, His truth holds firm. This is not a detour. This season, this heavy, hollow space, is not a mistake. It's not proof that something went wrong. In fact, it might be the exact place your faith is supposed to be, because it's in the dark that roots grow deeper. It's in the silence that strength is formed. And yes, you might feel like you're failing. You might think, this can't be faith, this feels like defeat. But faith is not the absence of struggle. It is the decision to stay, even when the struggle doesn't go away. Every tear you've cried, every silent prayer you've whispered, every moment you've chosen not to run, God has seen it all. He counts your sighs as worship. He receives your brokenness as offering, because He's not measuring your faith by how strong you appear. He's measuring it by how deeply you trust. Even now, even here, even when it hurts, you are still walking the path of faith. You are still His, and He is still shaping you, not around the pain, but through it. Maybe you've been taught that God only works in the light, that breakthroughs only happen on the mountaintops, that transformation looks like joy and clarity and answered prayers. But Scripture tells a deeper story, one that runs through the valleys, through the questions, through the ache of waiting. God shaped Joseph in a prison. He formed David in hiding. He refined Moses in the wilderness. He didn't remove them from the pain. He met them in it. He used the silence, the delay, the loss to deepen their dependence, to prepare them for what was next. So why would it be any different with you? This moment, The one where you feel most alone might be the very ground where something holy is taking root. Not because it feels good, but because it is real. God does not waste seasons of sorrow. He does not overlook nights of confusion. He is a potter, and you are the clay, and it's in the shaping, in the pressing, that the masterpiece begins to take form. But shaping doesn't feel like a miracle. It feels like breaking. It feels like being stretched past what you thought you could handle. It feels like surrender, not success. And that's exactly where he does his most meaningful work. You don't need to fake peace to stay near him. You don't need to explain the ache. You just need to bring it. Bring the anger, bring the confusion, bring the parts of you you've been too afraid to name. He can handle it. He welcomes it. Jesus doesn't meet you only at your best. He kneels beside you when you're undone, when you're crying on the bathroom floor, when you're too numb to pray, when you feel unworthy to worship. His nearness doesn't depend on your ability to hold it all together. It depends on his unchanging love, and that love hasn't moved. So even if you can't feel him, keep speaking to him. Even if it feels one-sided, keep showing up. That's the kind of faith that heaven applauds, not perfect, but persistent, not confident, but clinging, not loud, but alive. This is where faith becomes fire-tested. This is where it stops being about what you know and starts becoming about who you trust. You may not be able to see what he's doing yet, but faith doesn't wait for sight. It moves in hope. It walks in trust. It believes, not because the evidence is obvious, but because the character of God is unshaken. Right here, in the quiet, he is doing something deeper than relief. He is building a foundation that won't collapse the next time the storm comes. Not a shallow, surface faith, but a faith that endures. A faith that cannot be taken. A faith that knows, even when nothing makes sense, he is still good. And that kind of faith is never built by accident. If you could see what God sees right now, you wouldn't doubt his timing. You'd see the roots growing deeper beneath the surface. You'd see the pressure shaping something eternal inside you. You'd see a version of yourself forming, not the anxious one, not the one exhausted from striving, but the one grounded, steady, anchored in who he is, not just in what he gives. But right now, it just feels like loss. It feels like silence. It feels like God left the room. And that's the lie the enemy whispers in the dark. If you can't feel him, he must be gone. But God never promised constant feeling. He promised constant presence. And his presence is not fragile. It doesn't flee when your faith shakes. It holds firm. So maybe this is the moment that shifts everything, not because he changes your situation, but because he changes your heart in the middle of it. Maybe this is where you stop performing, stop pretending, stop trying to earn what's already been given, and you simply surrender. Not because it's easy, but because you're tired, because striving hasn't worked, because you've tried to fix yourself and it hasn't brought peace. So now you just come, empty, honest, needy, and that's where grace meets you. That's where God leans in, not with condemnation, but with compassion, not with rules, but with rest. He says, I see you, I know, I've never left. And slowly, in the stillness, the truth starts to settle. You were never abandoned. You were being shaped. He didn't walk away. He was working in ways you couldn't see. You thought the silence meant he'd stopped loving you, but the silence was where he was teaching you how deep that love really goes. You thought you had to feel him to follow him, but now you know real faith walks even in the dark. And this is how it grows. Not with noise, not with clarity, but with trust, with surrender, with the quiet decision to believe He's still good, even when life is not. This is what shaping looks like. It's uncomfortable, it's disorienting, but it's also holy. Because when you come out the other side, you won't just have stronger faith, you'll have a deeper relationship with God. Not built on circumstance, but built on His character. Not built on feeling close, but built on the truth that He is always close. Even here, even now, especially now. And that truth, that quiet, unshakable truth, is what will carry you.